안녕하세요. Huh? My very first Korean word taught by Professor Kim. So I want to do something very quick. Everybody get up. Get up, stand up. Stand up. Turn to the person to the right and high five. If you're on the edge, yeah, there you go. Okay, now, sit down. Thank you. Startup talent is about fun. You gotta have fun. Okay. My name is Andy Tang. I'm the CEO of Draper University. As Professor Kim mentioned, I'm also a investor in a venture fund. In fact, that's really my daytime job. I've been investing since the year 2000. In 2012, Tim Draper started a school, and that's kind of how I would call it, inadvertently got into the field of education. I share with you the origin of Draper University. It was started by my partner, Tim Draper. He is the founder of Draper Fisher Jefferson, known as DFJ, and he has invested in many different companies that you probably recognize, such as Coinbase, Tesla, Baidu, Skype, and all these companies. But what we notice is that when we deal with talent globally, we often have very smart people come to us with very good ideas, but something was missing, right? And it was very difficult for us to figure out what was missing. And Tim has been an investor much longer than I have, so we put together all the investments we have made. What we concluded was literally looking at about 1,000 companies. We noticed something intangible was missing, right? It's not, oh, these people weren't technical, or they didn't have enough education, or the market was too small. None of those things. It was something inherently in the person, right? We couldn't figure out how to describe this. We described this as an entrepreneurial spirit, right? That was what was missing, okay? So then we started thinking, what should we do about it, right? So Tim's idea was, let's create a people accelerator. This term accelerator is probably not very commonly known, but let's kind of define it a little bit. It's basically a place where companies go and spend some time and you help the business accelerate. But what we set out to do in 2012 was to create a platform that accelerates people. Not a business, but people, right? So the thought here is that if we accelerate people or the founders, then by definition, the business will accelerate, right? And to a certain extent, I would argue accelerating people is more important, or as even more important than accelerating the business, right? Because I could help someone fix a business problem, and then they'll run into a different business problem 2 years later. Whereas if I help accelerate people, that person is going to help navigate. This is where we're located. We're literally right next to San Francisco Airport. So if you're in the audience and you are passing through San Francisco Airport, this is quite an interesting site. We literally get tour buses from everywhere to go visit. We bought a hotel. We turned an old hotel into a school. So on the first 2 floors, it's classroom, and then people live upstairs, and they stay there for 5 weeks. And we draw students from 80 countries around the world. We've been doing this since 2012. Close to 1,000 students have graduated. And then we have a classroom that doesn't look like a classroom. It looks like fun, okay? We have beanbag chairs. People sit on the floor. Sometimes people fall asleep. When people fall asleep, we blame the speakers. We don't blame the students. Right? We think the classroom has to be interesting enough. Even when you sit in the beanbag chair, you have to be fully engaged. And we also don't have, when the speakers come, they're typically the CEOs of our portfolio company, or the VP of engineering will come in and teach development. We have VP of sales come in and teach sales. We really bring practitioners to come in and teach things to our students. Our mission is very simple. Our mission is actually not to help people start business. You may think, because I'm a venture capitalist, I try to create this so I could create more business for me to fund, but it's actually not that. The mission is more fundamental. The mission is to really help people bring out their entrepreneurial spirit. You know, there are many great schools in the world where they bring the best people, right? Harvard, Stanford, MIT, they admit 0.1% of the students. When these students come out, they're the world's best people. Well, you know, if you have that kind of selection, you should bring out the best people. But our thinking is everyone has entrepreneurial spirit. Everyone. I have it, you have it, each one of you. What's happening is in the society, in the modern society, it kind of pushed that entrepreneurial spirit down. Our goal is very simple. We spend 5 weeks, we unleash that, help you rediscover that. It's almost like children. Children are very creative. By the time they go through school, sometimes that creativity is not gone, but it's covered by structure, by discipline, by processes. We're basically trying to unprogram that and let the children inside of you to come out. Okay? This is a snapshot of our accomplishment. What you notice is that I'll point out maybe a few things that's most interesting. Many, top U.S. schools would track salaries upon graduation. Okay, I went to a business school, and our business will track. By the time I get out, I make $100,000 a year, and I can run a quick return on investment analysis and figure out that was a good investment, right? We don't track that. You know what we track? We track how many jobs you create. And on average, our students, they create 3 jobs per person. Create jobs. That is the metric for success. And I believe that should be the metric for success for future education programs. So let's define what startup talent is. This is, after all, a HR conference. We're very interested in talent, right? A talent, in my mind, is a startup talent is someone who could deal with ambiguity, right? Something that's not very obvious, right? So if you think about a Airbnb, Uber, you think about Google, or you even think about Baidu in China, right? A communist country where media is controlled. How does the entrepreneur think about dealing with that ambiguity? You're essentially doing something a little bit in the gray area, but you got to navigate to figure that out. Okay. Also, the talent has to be able to deal with lots of adversity, right? You run into challenges. How do you deal with that? How do you persevere over a long period of setback? Our investments, on the average, I should say our successful investments, on average, do you know how long it takes for them to exit? Over 10 years. How many of you in the audience have done something more than 10 years? I know there are more than that, but no one raises their hands because everyone is a little bit shy. All right? I haven't done anything more than 10 years before my venture job, right? Doing something for 10 years is actually very difficult. So my job evaluating entrepreneurs actually becomes, I interview someone, my first question is, can this person do this for 10 years? Most likely this piece of paper in front of them they're trying to pitch to me is not going to be the same at the end of the 10 years, right? So it has nothing to do with that piece of paper. It's me deciding if that person has the persistence to do something for 10 years. Then your question is, as a school, what do we do about that, right? We actually train people to be persistent. So we have programs, we bring in American military, Navy SEAL, Army Rangers to come in and help students discover that inner perseverance they have as a child, right? And interestingly enough, I'll share an anecdote with you that oftentimes the best entrepreneurs or best entrepreneur talent oftentimes don't have very good grades in school, right? It's almost very counterintuitive, okay? You know why? Because of the 10-year rule. When you have very good grades in school, you go to get a very good job, and if you go do a startup in year 2, 3, 4, when things get very difficult, Facebook will call you, IBM will call you, Microsoft will call you and say, come work for us, right? So a lot of these people will just say, all right, I'm going to give up and go do that, right? But if you didn't have very good grades, you don't get those calls. You're stuck, right? You're on a 10-year march. You keep going, you keep going, you keep going. And that is what happened, right? It's not a coincidence. A lot of people, these good founders drop out of school. They can't get a job, right? They don't have any option, right? I'm kind of joking a little bit, but you could kind of see there is a non-obvious selection process, and that's kind of what we're looking for, right? So when in fact the top schools are looking for the top 0.1% of the academic talent, we're almost looking for the rest. Not the worst, the rest, okay? The 99.9% of the people who don't have those options to get into the top schools academically or not, there's a lot of talent in that pool. And our job is to help them uncover the talent. Okay? Okay, so how do we create it? So this is our curriculum. It's a little bit difficult for you to see, but I'll point out 3 things, okay? We, again, analyzed our venture portfolio. What we found was that over 70% of the value were roughly generated by 20% of the companies. And those 20% of the companies often are the very large outcomes, right? This would be the Baidu, this would be the Tesla, this would be the Skype, right? And then if you look at what they're going after, they're typically very big, right? Almost seem a little bit crazy in the beginning. So that's why our first module is vision. Think big, right? If you want to do a startup, might as well do a big startup. If you want to do a small startup, sometimes economically speaking, it's better to work for Google, Facebook, and whatnot, okay? So we teach them to find a big problem to solve, a difficult problem to solve, right? In our day and age, I mentioned everyone is smart. The reason why there's a big problem that hasn't been solved is because it's difficult. It's ambiguous. It's non-obvious, right? So that's why we have the next module. It's called creativity. We'll say, creativity, either you have it or you're not. You're creative, he's creative, but I'm not. It's actually not that. I think there's a science behind creativity. So we have a course called Design Thinking that we teach them how to solve big problems in ways that conventional science or engineering have not followed, right? So we look for the nonlinear innovation, right? There's a linear innovation, we typically look for something that's more disruptive. When you find something that's nonlinear and non-obvious to society, typically it could be a little bit embarrassing, okay? So this would be something like an electric car when all the cars are combustion engine, right? Now that people think, oh yeah, of course you need a EV. Of course you use a voice over IP Skype. But think about when these companies started, back then it was actually kind of a crazy, if not stupid idea. Like why would you want to do electric car when you have the gasoline infrastructure, right? So that's why we teach them the third module, evangelism, right? Evangelism is different from salesmanship. Salesmanship is selling a product. Evangelism is almost like spreading a religion. Because these startup ideas, when they're big, when they're non-obvious, oftentimes you almost have to believe it like a religion, right? If you have a religion, you could last for 10 years. If you just want to make a quick money, you cannot last 10 years. Okay, let me that's just a quick example of what we do. This is a typical schedule. The students get up 9 o'clock in the morning, and we keep them busy until at nighttime, so it's kind of around the clock, and they live in. And then we also use practitioners, like I mentioned. This is important. We notice, so we target students 18 to 28, kind of millennial, Gen Z, that age group. So what we notice is that when we lecture, they don't listen, right? So what we discovered was that we have to make them do stuff, okay? So we have to send them to the street, make them do stuff. I'll give you 2 examples. The first example is evangelism is important, right? So you have to be able to sell an idea. So we send these students to the streets, and we have them sell something very embarrassing, okay? What's something embarrassing you could think of? Okay, so keep that in your mind. I'll tell you what I asked them to sell. We asked them to sell underwear sometimes, okay? Men sell women's underwear. Women sell men's underwear to strangers in the street. We asked them to sell hemorrhoid cream. I don't know if the translation is coming through in Korean. We asked them to sell, birth control devices. We asked them to sell adult pleasure toys, right? A little bit crazy, a little bit unconventional, very controversial, but very effective. If you could sell this to strangers by pitching an electric vehicle idea, okay, or a voice over IP Skype to investors or to employees, no problem. You won't get embarrassed. After that exercise, you will never get embarrassed. It's like me. I don't ever get embarrassed anymore because we've done the worst. By now, nothing could embarrass me anymore, right? So we teach them, there are 3 people you need to convince to become a true entrepreneur. The first person is you have to convince your family, oftentimes a wife or husband, so they could endure your work. The second person you have to convince is your co-founder, employee, or team. The third is the investor. So you just have to convince 3 people. And if you could sell these things to strangers, you could convince these 3 people, no problem. So instead of us telling them these things, we make them do it. We have them do another thing. We have them go and find a job in one afternoon. Drop them off in downtown San Francisco, go find a job. Many people come back with very interesting jobs. One person became a software engineer at Twitter. The other person became a sweeper at a gay bar, right? One afternoon, right? What's the takeaway? We teach them that at that age range, if your startup fail, no big deal. No big deal. You get another job. One afternoon, you're back on your feet. Don't be afraid to try big things and fail. That's the message. Okay, that's what I talked about. You keep failing and failing until you succeed, right? In Silicon Valley, there's an idea of fast iteration, right? Fail, try new things, fail, try new things. That's what we teach them. And these are actually methodologies you can learn. Like I said, everything is immersive, it's hands-on. You live there 24/7, and that's what you live and breathe by. Lastly, let me go back. We have an ecosystem of support, right? Like I mentioned, I started in the venture business, and we also have an incubator, we have an education arm, and then we also have a think tank. We think we could help entrepreneurs at any stage of the journey, right? If you just have an idea, you come to a university. You have an idea and a small team, you come to our incubator. And then if you got some revenue, we have a venture business that we could support you. And that is what I see as a future of harnessing talent. I worked at large companies like ABB, Siemens before, and there has always been a struggle of how do I create internal entrepreneur talent. It's really interesting. I think what we ended up discovering was that it has always been inside these big companies. It's not how to define it or create it, it's how not to kill it, right? Because as a manager, sometimes I get annoyed by my reports. Hey, I want to do this, I want to do that, maybe you should do something different. And I'm thinking, oh man, I got my earning I need to report. Don't bother me, just meet the sales numbers. But when in fact, in the long run, how do you keep that creativity, that curiosity of your employees is actually very important, because that may not affect you in this quarter, but it will affect you in 5-10 years from now. So everything we talked about in creating and harnessing the talent, it could actually be applied in big companies successfully, right? And you don't need to do anything different. It literally is to not kill it, right? Not killing it is harnessing it. Great. So with that, thank you for your time this morning. And if you have any questions or follow-up, here's my email address. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your inspiring.